The state statute has a specific provision regarding sealed court records, in which the official response from the agency is supposed to be that no records exist. And so it wasn't when I was requesting these records that they were denying them. They were telling me no records existed, even though I knew records did exist.
I'm Justin Silverman of the New England First Amendment Coalition. Today's program is brought to you in part by the Society of Professional Journalists Foundation, which supports our First Amendment and Free Press program, where we speak with local journalists, discuss their work, and talk about how it contributes to our democracy. Many thanks to the SBJ Foundation for its support. I'm here today with Derek Brouwer, reporter at 7 Days. Derek, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Derek, I wanted to have you on today because for the last several months, we've been talking about law enforcement agencies, potential reform in nearly every state in the country, but more specifically, a part of that being transparency and how to increase accountability through more transparency with police at all levels. And a component of that I feel like is really flying under the radar, not getting a lot of attention, is the role of police in our schools. Most often when we're speaking about police brutality, for example, we picture police in the streets making arrests, but we don't often think about police in our school corridors, for example. You just recently reported about a story that occurred in St. Albans High School. Can you tell us a bit about what happened there?
Yeah, so the city and school district there just settled with a family of a disabled high school student who was arrested during sort of what has started as, I think, a disciplinary incident outside the cafeteria there. The officer used a sort of derogatory term for people with disabilities during the course of what became an arrest, and then handcuffed the student and booked him. The family filed a human rights complaint over the language the officer used during the arrest, and just received a $30,000 payout as a result of that.
So how common is this to have police officers in schools, at least in Vermont? Is this common to have a police officer patrolling the corridors and really providing a law enforcement, some kind of law enforcement surveillance within the school itself? Is this a common occurrence?
Yeah, it's certainly not uncommon, Justin. I think there was a recent state survey that found that like 20% of schools in Vermont have SROs. But in high schools, I think it's more concentrated. So it's we don't know the exact figure, but it's probably closer to half of high schools have an SRO, and certainly those that don't have SROs stationed at a school full time will sometimes call on police, to respond to incidents there. So the level of interaction of police in schools is a little bit higher than those numbers suggest.
So, Derek, you have these police officers in the school, sometimes making arrests, like what occurred at St. Albans. They're not out on the streets making this arrest in full public view. So how do you find out about these incidents? How did you go about reporting this story?
Yeah, this is a really good point, Justin. It's not as simple, and in some cases, I think not possible to learn much about what's going on. In this case, we received a tip from somebody who had actually witnessed this arrest, and this issue has gained. Now, the arrest occurred about a year ago, but the issue has gained renewed attention in the last few months as part of the sort of national conversation around policing. And so I think this witness spoke up about it as a result of that context. Now, once I got this tip that this had happened, obviously went to straight to the police department to try to request records related to the incident. And I knew some details about the incident, including where it occurred and on what day it occurred. So I thought I had a good chance of finding this information out, but was denied in my records request twice. After I appealed it, it was denied again as well. But after that appeal was also denied, the city manager for the city of St. Albans told me that they were finalizing a settlement with the family of the student, and that he would release some information as part of that settlement once it was finalized. That came out a few weeks later, and they released a statement from the city as well as some documents related to the incident, some limited documentation, which we can get into. And then they did let me view the body camera video, which unfortunately is also a very partial record of what happened during the incident. So as a result of what I think was the settlement with the family is why we got anything at all related to the incident. The reasoning that they denied all of these requests was related to, they pointed to a couple different statutes related to sealed court records and juvenile court records.
Do you run into this a lot, covering schools, looking for information about law enforcement within those schools? Are there specific laws that are in place that prevent you from getting arrest information that would otherwise be public and available to you?
Yeah, so Vermont has a statute that really it's pretty extensive in what it covers in terms of juvenile court proceedings, and there is some language in there that extends the sort of sealing of these court records to law enforcement agencies that hold things like arrest records and whatnot. It's really frustrating for me because, as I made clear to the city, my interest was not at all in the student's alleged wrongdoing. It was in the officer's conduct with a member of the public in a public place. But they seem to have at least a reasonable case for withholding some of that information. Now, I'm not the only, I haven't done a ton of reporting on this very specific incident of officers in schools, but I know, for instance, the ACLU of Vermont has requested this sort of information quite a bit in the past, and has gotten sort of mixed responses from departments around the state. Every city or department seems to, come up with a slightly different version of what it thinks it needs to provide. So, in speaking with them for this story, they've suggested that, and I think they've suggested this for a couple of years, that the legislature may need to contemplate some sort of statutory change or exception for this sorts of incidents if they want, more transparency is regarding what officers are doing in schools.
Interesting. So let's be, very clear. Barring any change in the legislature or any new laws that are enacted, barring any goodwill on behalf of law enforcement to just give you the records that you're asking, if you didn't receive that tip, would this story have ever been reported? Would we even have known about this arrest at any time up until possibly the settlement?
Yeah, I don't think we would have, and it's an open question as far as in this particular case, would they have publicized the settlement at all? That may be a different matter, but if there wasn't, it's very safe to say if there was not a human rights complaint and human rights settlement with this family, we wouldn't have learned anything about that, and we know that because the St. Albans City Police Department has had a number of troubling use of force incidents over the last couple of years that we've reported on. I mean, it's a force of like 25 cops, and I think there are 4 who are either under criminal investigation or have been arrested. So last year, one of my colleagues at 7 Days requested a list of all civilian complaints and use of force reports from their officers for 2019. And it was interesting because when they did the documents they did finally produce for this SRO incident included a civilian complaint and a use of force report. But when we look back through the documents they had produced for our request, they just weren't in there. And there was no indication in their production back in the fall of 2019 that they had omitted anything. So essentially, it was just hidden from us as if it didn't exist at all.
What do you do in that situation when you have what seems to be evidence that information is being withheld? How do you respond? How do you go about getting that information that you're entitled to?
Yeah, I mean, in this case, we appealed the request, but it is very hard, and when you don't know what you don't know, when it is just purely hidden from you. I mean, there really is little recourse you can do. This was a pretty unique situation in which we were able, because of a subsequent development, to realize that something had been withheld. I think practically speaking, I need to make a point in every records request to have the agency tell you if they're withholding anything. It's not even clear that would work in this case because the state statute has a specific provision regarding sealed court records in which the official response from the agency is supposed to be that no records exist. And so it wasn't when I was requesting these records that they were denying them. They were telling me no records existed, even though I knew records did exist. So it's I don't really know any way through this, other than some sort of statutory change or carve out for it. I mean, certainly, I think cities could interpret the law, differently. I'm not sure it's quite that clear cut. I think, perhaps it is. I question whether the law was written in a way that intended to shield this much information. But practically speaking, I think that's what it's doing.
So what do you do in the meantime if you can't always rely on public records requests? If you're not getting the transparency you need from the law enforcement agency, how do you go about working sources and maintaining relationships? And as a reporter, what other tools are at your disposal to get to the story and make sure that you're aware of these arrests when they do occur?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple things we can do. Obviously, you just mentioned the sort of source building and the emphasizing the importance of relationships with people in the community who can come to you and feel like you are a resource in those situations. But in this case, we made a point of putting aspects of the records issues in the story in the story here. It made for a little bit more of a complicated narrative for readers, but I think it's really important that they understand the limitations and barriers that we have in place. And I think in this case, it made a point of having a line in the story that said, "When this probably wouldn't have come to light if not for these two things." Somebody, a witness, talking to us, and this human rights settlement. So I think it is sort of incumbent upon us as journalists to help our readership understand and our lawmakers understand what barriers are in the way and the role they can play in helping the news get out.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And one of the reasons why we have interviews like this is to really pull back the curtain a bit as to how journalists do their job, the roadblocks that they encounter, and in your case, the public records requests that are denied, and how difficult it can be sometimes to get information that all of us, the public, we really deserve to know. So, Derek, thank you for all the good work that you're doing and helping us understand a little bit more about what's going on in St. Albans and some of the challenges that you're facing reporting in the community. Many thanks.
Yeah, thanks for your questions, Justin.